thinking about how he was going to need to talk to Miss Mia about what had been going on. How she was planning on adopting him. Kennedy wanted her to smile. He really liked it when she smiled at him. Then tell him how she would fix everything and how it wasn't his fault, but a big part of his mind told him she was going to push him away, slap him or bend him over her knee and hit him with her hand or a belt before sending him packing. I'm wearing a skirt, a freaking training bra and girls' panties, she can't understand that. It happened to me and I don't understand. Anxiety continued to fill Kennedy as the group made their way back home. Even sitting in the front seat of Aunt Rosie's car hadn't cheered him up. Miss Mia was so nice to him. Many foster parents started out that way, or at least were in front of other people, and in the end they were all the same, sending him away. And the next time it happened, probably this time, he wouldn't be sent to another foster home, he was going to go to jail. Kid jail, juvenile hall, after some of the things he had done to lash out, to get back at those who had been cruel to him. Turning his head, Kennedy watched the freckle-faced woman as she drove, admiring how pretty she was and thinking about how nice she had been. He didn't like ballet or wearing the unitard, but it had been something she brought him and the girls to so they could have fun. Kenzie and Abby did, and thinking back on it, how Aunt Rosie was doing her best, he had to smile. He could tell they were getting closer to the house, and that would mean the time was coming for him to actually say what was going on. Standing with his legs together on his tiptoes with his hands above his head as Kenzie and Abby did the same while the woman that had been so kind to him smiled and snapped photos, could be one of his last memories of the family before things went bad. Kennedy tried to savor the experience even though it had been embarrassing and a blow to his ego. While Kennedy was lost and bought the car soon pulled up to the two-story house with the white picket fence. Rosemary moved the car into park, happy to see her sister's SUV already parked in the driveway. Turning in her seat, she first gave a smile to her new niece in the front seat before giving the same to her other nieces in the back. I suppose you all were good, but were you good enough to have ice cream later? Yes. Abby yelled as she unbuckled herself so that she could latch onto the seat in front of her where her aunt sat. Inside voice Abby. Mackenzie said, rubbing her ear where her little sister's scratch attacked her. Holding up her hand, Rosemary laughed at the outburst. Okay. We will call it good enough. Why don't you three run on inside? I have a few phone calls I have to make for work. Getting out of the car with a great deal of trepidation and his eyes on the green grass in the front yard, Kennedy started to make his way to the house. The hope that allowed him to dismiss things before had quickly been overshadowed by his experiences, and it felt more and more like just waiting for the hammer to fall. Inside the house, Mia heard someone pull up in the driveway and heard the car doors close. Moving to her front door, onto the porch and down into her yard, she went to greet her kids and sister. She felt bad that she had to drop everything with them in order to pick up and run with things at the office. The first one to come upon her was her youngest, who slammed into her enough that she almost lost her balance. Hey sweetie, what do you have there? She asked, pulling on the white tutu she had on. The girl burst into an excited story about how her sister took them to see the ballet and how they all got to be ballerinas and how she had been the best, and because of that she got to take home an extra tutu. The phrasing of extra made her notice the bags in her eldest daughter's hands and the one in Kennedy's, but the bag in the boy's hand was the least of what caught her attention. Kennedy. She said the boy's name, her just now remembering a conversation with her sister about him wanting to be called Dee. Mia's gaze held on the 17-year-old boy who was shorter than her 13-year-old daughter. He had a yellow headband holding back his neatly trimmed strawberry blonde hair, a white blouse with ruffled shoulders, yellow skirt, white hose and shiny Mary Jane shoes that she thought might belong to Abigail. The teen boy wasn't making eye contact, his eyes were downcast and looked worried. Looking up from him, she looked to her younger sister who was standing just outside her vehicle and a cell phone to her ear. She was about to ask what was going on when Mackenzie spoke up. Mom, Dee, she said, making sure to use the feminine moniker. Has been telling everyone that she is only 10 and isn't a boy. What do you mean, hon? Mia with concern as she once again looked at Kennedy. I mean, after she borrowed clothes from Abby, she got the rest of her clothes ruined, so she changed into the spare dress we brought from Abby, and since then has been lying to Aunt Rosie, and Mackenzie had been trying to lay it on thick, calling Kennedy her and she to drive home, that everyone else was just following along. She didn't get as far as she wanted before her mother interrupted. A whirlwind of thoughts ran through Mia's mind. The first was confusion, the next were a series of memories from the short time he had been with the family. How much he enjoyed having his hair brushed like the girls, how he said the current decorations in his bedroom were fine. How Mackenzie had asked her help to rehang the poster board that they made, saying how Kennedy was upset that it kept falling down. Before going to the park, she had practically made Kennedy wear some of her daughter's clothes, and he had gone along with it. The more she thought about it, the less that made sense on its own, but in context with other things it was just another piece to the puzzle that was her foster child. Kennedy had told her how he liked being called Ken, but now that he was getting comfortable with them he wanted to be called Dee Dee, and had told everyone he was actually a girl. Ken. Dee Dee, come here, honey. Here it comes. Kennedy thought as he marched forward. Mackenzie already told her lie, he was going to tell Miss Mia the truth, and that truth was going to get him thrown out, and after experiencing what he had in the home, having to leave was already hurting. Mia was about to ask if what Mackenzie said was true, but the truth of it was in front of her. She knew of stories about sisters putting their little brother in a dress or making them dress up because they were spying on a slumber party. This wasn't one of those cases. The 17-year-old boy very much looked like the adolescent girl he was saying he was, and she couldn't imagine any teen boy putting up with something like this. Getting his hair cut in a feminine style, getting his ears pierced, wearing girls' clothes when going out in public. The truth was clear to her, there wasn't a question for the person in front of her. Just one for herself: would she accept a child in her home that had gender identity issues? While the question crossed her mind, she knew the answer right away. Moving, she pulled the child into an embrace. Dee Dee, I want you to know you are accepted. The fact that you trusted us, your new family with who you really are, shows me just how brave you are. I am thrilled to have another daughter. Panic started to run through Kennedy, his body stiffening as the gorgeous woman hugged him. No, that isn't right. He thought, even as his eyes started to well up from the positive feelings he was getting from what she said while holding him tight. Miss Mia, it wasn't my fault, I want to, and I'm not a girl. Giving Kennedy another tight hug, Mia ran her fingers through his hair while looking into his eyes at the same time. It's okay, sometimes how we are born isn't who we are. You have had a hard life, I'm thrilled you could trust us with this part of you. But, Dee Dee, I need you to know that you are loved and accepted. You love me? The confused teen said, not really sure how to take this. He was trying to tell her this wasn't supposed to happen, and then she was going to throw him out, but instead she was saying how she wanted him as her daughter and that she loved him. I do, so does Mackenzie and Abby. Mia said this, becoming both her girls over with one of her hands before returning it to hold Kennedy. She knew trans people existed, she didn't have a problem with anyone who was gay or anything like that, but she also didn't know what she could do to help Kennedy feel like the person he was. She was on the inside, other than to tell her that she was loved, accepted, and to treat her like the girl she wanted to be. The rest she would have to learn. First Kennedy felt Abby join the hug, and then Mackenzie. What he didn't see was that she ground her foot in the grass before joining. She wanted Kennedy to join the family, and at the same time wanted to protect everyone from the lie that had blown out of proportion. If her first plan didn't work, she would just have to make sure her new little sister stayed around so no one else would find out. I. Kennedy started to say as his emotions went wild. Being told he was accepted felt good, it felt great, and being told he was loved felt even better. The problem was that Miss Mia was accepting him as a girl, making him feel smaller. It felt like he had a choice to make, be the girl he didn't want to and have a home and family where he was safe and loved. Or reject it and take his chances on what would happen when he, a 5-foot-tall boy, went to jail because of things he had done before. "I love you too," he said as the floodgates opened up and he started to cry in earnest. He wasn't a girl, but still the choice was easy for him. It bothered him that it was. He wasn't much of anything in his own mind, except angry at the world. He had aspirations of being a rock star and a race car driver. He was going to win trophies racing around a NASCAR track, and he thought he could do it all if he had people around him that actually loved him. Scene 22. It wasn't until later that night, after dinner, after ice cream, that Mia sat in the living room with her younger sister. Both still dressed for the day, except now barefoot, and had wine glasses in their hands and a mostly empty bottle of wine that they had time to about what was going on, now that the kids were all off to bed. "Okay, you said you would tell me later what the hugging and crying was about in the front yard." "I think." Rosemary pulled out her phone, turning the screen on just long enough that she could see the time. "Yep, I confirmed it. It is now later. It was about Kennedy." Mia stopped after saying the boy's, now girl's, name before holding up one hand to indicate she knew she messed up. The little time she had to look into what it meant to raise someone who was transgendered told her about dead naming. Kennedy wanting to be called Dee Dee was still a nickname that was derived from Kennedy. So she wasn't sure if Mia corrected herself once more, arriving at the conclusion at how hard it would be and not being able to imagine how hard her foster child's life had been with this extra weight on their shoulders. Her mental train car had detailed on the not-so-simple question of if Kennedy still wanted to be Kennedy and just use Dee Dee as a nickname, or if that was what they wanted to legally change their name to, and had just about completely forgotten that the train left the station when she started to try and talk about things to her sister. "Dramatic pause much?" Rosemary said, giving her sister a look and wondering if the glass of wine to help her unwind after the day had hit her a bit hard. "No," Mia said before continuing. "Dee Dee has been lying about who she is." She started, now not really knowing where to begin, waving her open hand in the air from left to right and then left again like she was wiping away a whiteboard. She tried again. "Let me start over. Or start at all," Rosemary said teasingly. Giving her troublesome sister a glare for a half-second, Mia pushed on. "Yesterday morning, Dee Dee, then going by Ken, had a clothing problem, as in lack of some, and had to borrow some clothes from Abby, Mackenzie's clothes being too big." "Ken? Okay." Rosemary nodded, taking a sip from her glass. "I'm sure that wasn't the start of it. Dee Dee had already been very accepting of her room." Mia continued. "Stop." Rosemary shook her head. "You are talking around something. How about you say that part and move from there? Be like a man and skip the foreplay," she said with a laugh. "Fine, Dee Dee is trans. As in born a boy, but isn't really a boy and wants to, they feel like." Mia paused, letting out a long breath. She wasn't sure how things really worked and needed to do more research so she could help Dee Dee and not just be accepting. "Wait." Rosemary looked intently at her older sister. "How old is Dee Dee?" "She is 17, but apparently at the park she found a reason to wear one of Abby's dresses, a spare outfit I packed, and from there I'd been telling everyone that she was 10. I don't know, is age." She tried rolling a few words around in her mouth, not really sure what it would be called. "Is there a thing like being transgender but for age?" "I'm not sure if it is that or just the fact Dee Dee saw an opportunity to relive their life as who they wanted to be. To move away from what they had already been through so they could have a happier life." "I mean, I guess there is some logic there, I just don't know." Leaning back on the couch, Rosemary took a long pull from her glass of wine, draining it completely. 17-year-old boy, that little shit," she said with a smirk on her face. She had been seeing Dee just as someone who was a shy little girl that needed protection and love, but she had completely forgotten how she had learned to manipulate people when she was younger in order to survive. It didn't change much with how she felt, except a little proud that the girl, trans or not, had completely fooled her and manipulated her into getting what she wanted. A little shit? Really, Rosie? What? I can't say Dee is a big shit, that isn't even accurate. She then gave her sister a shrug before leaning forward to refill her glass. Believe it or not, people don't tend to deceive me often, at least not for long, and my new niece had me completely fooled. I think it more like Dee was fooling everyone, or trying till she felt safe enough to show the truth. Mia said as a counterpoint. Thinking over what her sister said, Rosemary could imagine just that and how it could have caused things like that scar on Dee's chin. All it would take is some insecure man to think the kid was gay to give them a beating to try and beat the gay or transgenderism out of them. Yeah, that poor child. Yeah, so, now I have to figure out how to move from there. Mia took the last sip of her glass of wine, putting the glass down, choosing not to get a third glass. Considering that Rosemary thought about the encounter earlier that day and how she had browbeat the social worker and had been steaming the entire day about how much bullshit there was in the foster care system for a mistake like that to happen. Her own experiences had colored her own thoughts on Dee. Well, the first thing we might need to do is contact social services. Yeah, maybe. Mia said, unsure if they really needed to know, but then went back to a yes. Kennedy wasn't adopted yet and she didn't want anything to get in the way of that. Sucking in some air through her teeth, Rosemary put her glass down, forgetting, having avoided talking to her sister about the encounter earlier that day, but it felt very relevant now. So, Dee's social worker showed up at the house today, and apparently she was new to the case, and I showed her Dee and it kind of set me off that they thought she was a boy and like years older. She tried to give her older sister a sheepish grin. And Mia used the same tone of voice she would if her girls were acting up. Pinching her lips together, Rosemary sucked on her teeth, feeling like she really screwed things up. I might have convinced her that Dee couldn't be what they were saying and that the records were wrong, and after a very reasonable discussion she agreed to change them. Closing her eyes, Mia pinched the bridge of her nose. This is a big deal, Rosie. You can't just do that. They can't just do that. It's fraud. She let out a long breath. Maybe we just kinda leave things as they are. This is what Dee wants, so no harm, no foul. No, that isn't how the law works. We can go through the proper channels to change Kennedy's name and gender. I know there is a legal process. I just know it yet, and just telling someone they are wrong and fix it is not the legal process. Did you know she's supposed to be receiving a sizable sum of an inheritance once she turns 18? This change would delay it by years. Professionally, I could lose all my government contracts if someone even caught word about me committing fraud. Again, maybe a good reason to leave things as they are, so no one gets in trouble. Legal trouble wasn't exactly something Rosemary was really familiar with, except for a very specific realm of it that had to do with her being picked up by vice cops. She had only learned how to navigate that particular legal landmine. Rosie, Mia said in frustration. First thing Monday we are going to call, and I mean we are going to call the agency and get this sorted out. Dee is going to get the help she needs, but it will have to be done right. Scene 23. That following Monday, far earlier than Rosemary would have preferred, the two sisters were on the phone being transferred back and forth between almost every single department at the government building handling Kennedy's case. It took several hours, but finally they were able to keep the same human being on the line long enough to answer their questions. Mrs. Adams, I'm so happy to hear from you. My name is Ortha Visser. How are you doing today? His tone rang out, channeling the spirit of an apologizing middle manager at a chain restaurant. You've been trying to reach me? Mia asked incredulously. We've been on hold for what feels like an eternity. She asked, knowing full well that she hadn't gotten any phone calls, text messages, or emails from the department. Yes, well, good help as they say. Mia pinched the bridge of her nose and sighed loudly to the little device set to speakerphone resting on the table between her and her sister. Look, there's an issue with Kennedy's paperwork that we need to resolve. Kennedy's caseworker came for a visit last week, and she might have been a little confused. Yes, ma'am, we're aware, but I assure you, this was the fault of just a single bad apple, and in no way reflects the competency of this agency as a whole. I'm sorry? Mia replied, completely lost at this point in the conversation. Mr. Visser, what are you talking about? While Mia was talking, Rosemary pointed to the phone, mouthing something she mostly didn't catch other than the word fucker. Rosemary hit mute on the phone as the man started to reply. I spoke to him earlier. He said something about needing to get me to someone who assists and then transferred me to voicemail hell. Trying to split her focus between her sister and what Mr. Visser was saying, Mia gave her sibling a nod, believing she was being a bit dramatic, but understanding her frustration considering she was very much feeling it too. The file mix-up? Mr. Visser seemed to be asking in return. Apparently some of little Dee Dee's, her documents were mixed in with some hooligan who happened to share the same name. He said, using the cute nickname the woman on the other end of the phone had given the girl in a way to help ingratiate himself. This Kennedy Towns was a problem child. We have it on good authority that he's run away from his last foster home, and somehow his paperwork wasn't properly filed away. A story like his is a dime a dozen. I hope that you don't let this affect your opinion of us too strongly. No need to call the media, or file a lawsuit or anything of that sort. We're all on the same team, and we all want what's best for little Dee Dee. Everything is in order, and we'll be sending off all the documents now. Congratulations on the new addition to your family. The documents? Mia said, looking from the phone and then to her sister who was sitting across from her. The adoption paperwork, for your records, as well as Dee Dee's birth certificate, adjusted to show you as her mother. If you need anything else adjusted, there's a form attached. You just send that back to us, and we'll get it fixed in a jiffy, no processing fees or anything like that. It's all pretty standard, ma'am. I assure you everything is in order. Again, there's no need to make a thing of this. It was really not a problem clearing up Dee Dee's file. Just a simple mistake. No need to make a thing of it. Mia didn't know what to make of what the man on the phone was telling her. Look, sir, I'm concerned about fraud. Who said anything about fraud? Mr. Visser was quick to interrupt. Like I said, everything is in perfect order. No need to worry about that. All the documents are official. They have all the necessary stamps, seals, and signatures. I assure you, ma'am, everything is above board, and I wish you and your family a happy life, going forward. Have a nice day, ma'am. It was then the man hung up the phone, leaving Mia and Rosemary staring blankly into each other's faces. What was that all about? Rosemary asked no one in particular. If they could have seen the other side of the call, they would have seen an office nearly in flames. It was all hands on deck getting the new file in order for a kid they seemingly had no record of. They had to stitch this child's history together from scratch. Fortunately, she wasn't very old, so they could get away with fudging a lot. A few foster homes before winding up with Mia, and that's it. They could put a bow on it. Mr. Visser intentionally had a few agents passing their phone calls back and forth, desperately trying to keep the Adams busy while he scrambled around making sure everything in need of notary was notarized, and everything in need of stamp was stamped. Finally satisfied with the result, he accepted Mia's call, and went straight into damage control mode. In his experience, it was rare for a woman of Mia's privilege to adopt through the public system, usually instead throwing money at a foreign adoption until they got the child they wanted. On the occasion they'd gone through government channels, they tended to throw their weight around. In the hands of a bored rich white lady, a wealthy white woman that had government contracts of her own according to the information in the file on what she did for work, a simple mistake like this could lead to the entire office being shut down, and every single one of his employees losing their job. Long ago he decided it was better to just skip the proper channels and give these people whatever they wanted so they can get back to doing the little bit of good they could manage. Little Dee was certainly never going to want for anything at the very least. He just wished the last agent on this case, Jessica Chow, hadn't just up and quit when she learned how fucked the situation was, though he was sure if he was just started out and had this bomb dropped in his lap, he might have done the same. A 17-year-old boy who has a history of running away, violence and arson getting mixed together with a 10-year-old girl just because they shared a name, it was a nightmare. Well, that was just strange, Mia said, with a shrug. She now had more questions than when their task started. Just what did you do to that poor caseworker, Rosie? Rosemary threw her hands up in her defense. I wasn't that bad, plus as far as I knew, I was just sticking up for my family. How is that a bad thing? If anything, it sounds like I made things much easier for you. Just think of how much money you're going to save on lawyers. So Dee has to be 10 again. She doesn't seem to mind. The young mother had grown accustomed to her youngest, the tiny human bulldozer that was Abby. Subtlety was not her strong suit, so when she was up to something, Mia always knew. While in this particular moment, a different little blonde, sporting a similar set of pigtails, was tiptoeing just outside the door, eavesdropping. Right behind him, a certain red-headed youth creeped up to join him, nearly causing him to squeal at the shock. Kennedy quickly grasped his mouth with both hands and took a deep breath. Calm, he held a finger up to his lips, shushing the brat before she could open her mouth, and the two listened into the rest of the conversation. Listen, sis. Rosemary continued. I know you're just trying to do the right thing. Sometimes that's not black and white. Let me ask you, consequences be damned, what do you want? Mia took a deep breath and plopped down onto a kitchen bar stool. It's been so long since someone has asked me that. I don't want to have to worry about a bunch of documents, case visits, and whatever other headache they decide to throw at me. I want to give Dee the life she's never had, and to help her to grow into a strong, beautiful young woman. I want my 3 children to get their own happily ever after. I want them to worry about ballet class and school plays, not being stripped away from their mother and into a system that doesn't give an iota about them. Sounds easy enough then. Rosemary tried to joke, while her sister sat before her, tears streaming down her cheeks, leaving her tone somber. Out in the hallway, Kennedy was blubbering. Mackenzie tried to comfort him with a warm embrace, but he shrugged her off and ran to his room, closing the door behind him, before crawling under the covers, his mind racing with the information he just overheard. Seriously though, Rosemary said, letting the idea hang for a moment. Maybe it's best to just leave things where they're at. God knows, I would have loved a do-over in my teen years. She certainly doesn't look 17, so why not just let sleeping dogs lie? This could be exactly what she needs. Fate even. Mia thought about what her sister was saying, and after running down the millions of possible outcomes in her thoughts, it certainly didn't seem like the worst option. It was far too easy for Kennedy to trick everyone into thinking she's 10. There's no way that would be possible with a normal healthy body. I've got a lot of thinking to do, but in the meantime, I'm going to schedule her an appointment with a primary care provider. Who knows how long it's been since she's received any medical care. I don't even know if her immunization records are current. Oh God, I'm such a bad mother. Hush, Mia. You know that's not true. You've just had a lot on your plate. Those girls know how much you love them. Schedule the appointment now, and then we can move on to the next thing. I'm positive, in a year, we'll look back at this moment and laugh." Rosemary pulled her sibling in tightly, and didn't let go. Scene 24:17, you say, the doctor asked for the fourth time in a row, while his gaze rested on the petite little girl with her hair braided into short pigtails, while she looked at her sports car magazine, legs crossed under her pastel blue dress, her feet in little white girl's flats and wearing a white cardigan to keep warm, while she sat upright on top of the examination table. "Yes, doctor." Mia explained the complexities of the situation to the kindly old man. As long as the doctor didn't feel that the child in this situation was in no danger, then they couldn't violate the confidentiality of their patients. Still, she was worried, but her concern for Kennedy outweighed anything else at that moment, so she took the risk. She knew he was unusually small for his age, but the fact that he spent several days passing himself off as a 10-year-old girl, and not a single person noticed anything out of the ordinary told her that something was definitely off with the youth. Since that realization, she wasn't able to enjoy a moment's peace, while every worst-case scenario ran through her head. Through the grapevine she learned of an older doctor, a gay man, who might have some sympathies to their current predicament, so she rolled the dice, and told the elderly gentleman every detail she could remember about Kennedy's story. If the young mother wasn't so adamant, the doctor might not have believed that the adorable little girl was actually old enough to have driven himself to the appointment. The two were standing out in the hallway, their conversation barely a whisper. "Doctor, I understand it takes all kinds, but for whatever reason, over the past week, she seems to have regressed back into childhood. Seriously, she's always been kind of shy, but now it seems she's hide behind mommy's skirts shy. Why isn't she growing? I'm terrified that she's seriously ill, and I'm not going to be able to protect her. She deserves a better life than that." Thinking about it, Mia had also noted Dee had been bickered less with Abby and Kenzie and hoped she was just being paranoid. Them all getting along had made her so happy. "Calm down, Mrs. Adams. I understand you're worried, but you don't need to let her see that. We'll get to the bottom of this, don't you worry. What say we go talk about this with the patient?" The two stepped into the little office, where the doctor held up his hand for a high five, which Kennedy stared at blankly for a moment, before clumsily returning the gesture. "Dee, your mom tells me you're a bit of a slow developer. That's okay, though. There's all kinds of different people. We just need to run some tests to make sure that you're healthy and getting everything you need." Okay," Kennedy answered, voice barely above a whisper, while he looked to Mia for reassurance. While his insides were turbulent on the outside, he remained placid. He had to for her. "Now the nurse is going to come in here and draw blood, but if you do a good job, I've been told by your mom that you're going to have a special day when you leave here. Can you do that for me?" Kennedy nodded silently. Good. We'll run those tests, and I'll be back when we have the results." Kennedy tried to keep a brave face, but he went white as a sheet once that needle punctured his skin, and to him the room started spinning as his mind helpfully reminded him of every other time an adult had hurt him, like the time that left the scar on his chin. Fortunately, Mia was there holding his hand to reassure him. "It happens to a lot of patients, honey," the nurse comforted. "I'll get you some water and some graham crackers, and you'll be good as new." "Thank you, ma'am," Kennedy whispered politely while the room swirled around him. After his snack, his stomach settled, and it wasn't too much longer before another knock rang out from the door. "You doing okay, ladies?" the doctor asked rhetorically. "We got your test back, Dee. I heard you were everything you promised. Good job, kiddo." Again there was an attempt at a high five, and again it went just as poorly. "Anyway, there's a couple of things I need to talk to your mom about, but nothing you should be worried over. As best I can tell now, you're going to live another 100 or 200 years. How does that sound? Good, sir. Kennedy replied, struggling to meet the elderly man's gaze. Great. Start getting your stuff together, and I'm gonna go chat with your mom real quick. Moving out into the hallway, it was obvious that that little back and forth between the doctor and Dee Dee had done nothing to assuage Mia's worries. What's the problem, doctor? Is she sick? What do I need to do? Calm down, Mrs. Adams. She's going to be just fine. She's just starting puberty. Shouldn't that have already happened? Yes, it should have, but she's been malnourished for the last 7 years of her life, so her body never had the energy to start the change, while that combined the obvious past trauma they have endured. The doctor said, thinking about the scars he saw on his patient's body. That's why she's still so small and underdeveloped. It also explains her bone density issue, so once she's past this, I doubt she'll have as many breaks going forward, mostly because her new mom would never do that to her, but also because she's finally going to start growing. Well, that's excellent news, then. Mia said happily, tears welling up in her eyes. Why did you need to discuss that with me first? Well, given Kennedy's unique circumstances, it looks like we have a choice to make. Either way, she's going to have to undergo some kind of hormone replacement therapy to jumpstart the process and get it moving along, so the question becomes, do we start that process for a boy or for a girl? It's a lifelong decision and must be taken seriously. Soft tissues can be changed later on, but once her bones are set, there's no going back outside of some radical surgeries. Wow. Mia said, dumbfounded. That is a big decision, then. What do you think? I think you need to discuss this with your daughter, and go from there. There's a plethora of laws on the books now about treating trans kids, but the good news is, since you've already got all the necessary paperwork saying Dee Dee is female, we can write this up as a hormone imbalance, and your insurance should cover everything in full if we go with female hormones. Otherwise, we just have a little more paperwork. Just talk with her, and get back in touch. The decision doesn't need to be made today, and we're not going anywhere. What about the fact that she's acting like a little kid? There's no way that can be healthy. Honestly, I don't know about that. My specialty is internal medicine. I do have a psychiatrist I can recommend, who's also in the community. I'm sure she would be happy to take on Dee Dee as a patient. I do know a lot of trans girls have a hard time emotionally maturing when they aren't allowed to express themselves correctly, and it's probably not helped by the fact that her parents died when she was that age. I'd imagine it's like her life has been on pause since then. Thank you, doctor. Mia said to the kindly fellow. Her smile was warm with gratitude, but her eyes still betrayed the panic in her thoughts. She didn't know exactly what the best decision was, but at least she had some sense of direction going forward. Kennedy had replaced his shoes and collected his magazine before stepping out into the hallway, where Mia was ready and waiting to greet him with a far too tight hug, something he wasn't ever sure he would be tired of receiving. I've been promising you a shopping trip since you've got here, and I think it's time I made good on that promise. What do you say? We can get ice cream after. Okay. Kennedy replied, with an exaggerated toothy smile, like he was channeling his new little sister Abby for just a moment. Down in the car, Kennedy took a seat in the back seat and buried his nose back into the magazine. He was reading and rereading the articles like he had with every car book he got his hands on. The entire drive to the mall, Mia snuck every possible glance at him she could sitting in the back seat. The figure in her rear view was obviously a cute little girl. Anyone could tell that. The way she looked, her clothes, even the way she spoke had drastically changed since her arrival, but it also seemed that every single day, Dee Dee was just that much less afraid of being abandoned. That trust was hard to earn, and she wasn't going to just give it up and dump Dee Dee back into the system. The first few days Mia thought she would wake up to find Dee Dee gone, and she had done her best to include the child in family activities. It was like night and day between then and now. The whole story was so absurd to her that she couldn't imagine anybody making it up. It was as though fate itself had pulled this child back to the starting line and said, "Try again." The more she sat with the idea, the easier it seemed to swallow. Dee Dee would have to get enrolled in school, and then there were the extracurriculars that were practically requisites for a girl that age. It was going to be an adjustment, but one she was more than willing to make if it made Dee Dee happy and feel whole. Like her sister had said earlier, she would have given anything for a second chance at those most formative years. Perhaps Rosemary could have had the foundation for success that Mia had benefited so much from. God forbid a girl like Dee Dee should ever have to follow in Rosemary's footsteps. The only idea Mia had of transgender girls in that line of work were the corpses on those episodes of Law and Order, SVU, and she definitely wasn't going to let that happen to her little girl. In that moment, Mia decided to let Dee Dee decide for herself just exactly who she was going to be, and she was going to make sure that whoever that was loved, and knew it. Mia took a moment to steady herself before meeting Kennedy's eyes in the rearview mirror and saying, "Honey, we need to talk about what the doctor said." "Okay," Kennedy replied apprehensively. He folded up his magazine and set it down onto the seat next to him, and then anxiously listened to Mia explain the gist of the doctor's diagnosis. "Dear, if you want to go through girl puberty, I fully support you, and hope you know that. It's a big decision, I know, but it's yours to make. Whatever you decide to do, just know I love you very much. Take some time to think it over, and we can talk about it before bed tonight." Just then, they pulled into the department store parking lot. If Kennedy could have read Mia's mind, he would have known she only mentioned him living as a girl because him living as a boy seemed to go without saying. To him, though, it demonstrated a clear preference. Ever since he'd overheard that conversation where Mia said she wanted Dee Dee to be her daughter. He knew about the issues with social services, and that if their ruse was discovered, she could go to jail for a long time. Not only would that dump him back into the system, but also the girls as well. Those two could be brats certainly, but they didn't deserve that. No one did. The night of the eavesdropping, he laid in bed crying and dreading the next day. Surely that would be the time when Miss Mia was done with his shit, and she'd be cutting him loose. Even those that weren't nice to him, even those that were cruel always sent him away. Why would someone like her want to keep him? The dark thoughts had a steady hold of his mind as he had cried himself to sleep that night. The whole of the next morning he sat at the breakfast table waiting for the heavy conversation he was sure was inevitably coming. Instead, two sleepy girls sat at the table beside him, but only after hugging him good morning. He'd flinch for the briefest of moments when they'd initiate contact, but in short order a feeling of safety would practically sneak up on him, and for a little while, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not too long after, Mia sleepily stumbled in and started the coffee machine before hugging each girl around their neck, and then kissing them gently on the forehead. "Good morning, my little lovelies," she said, taking extra care to hold Dee Dee just that extra bit longer, because she was certain they needed it after the stressful week she'd been having. Kennedy never noticed it, but it was this particular hug where for the first time, the inconvenience of a pubescent erection never even crossed his mind. He wasn't turned on. He was home. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in a long enough time that he had forgotten what it felt like till he experienced it now. The feeling of coming home, being home, was a feeling all unto itself. That day, after his bath, it was time to get dressed. At first, he looked through his drawers, trying to find the most gender-neutral shorts and t-shirt out of Aunt Rosie's recent purchases. However, in his digging he discovered a cute navy blue dress with cap sleeves, and a billowing knee-length skirt. He thought to himself, this is one over-the-top get-up, only to then take a second look and have the thought Miss Mia would probably like it creep into his mind. Surprising himself, he picked up the girlish garment and slipped it on, imagining the praise he might receive from Mia when she saw his choice. He felt completely naked for a brief period, but when Mackenzie stepped into the hallway from her room without paying him any special mind, he decided to just own it, and strode down the hall into his caretaker's bedroom. Abby was seated at the vanity, her own hair no longer damp, while her mother twirled it around a round brush and blasted it at all angles with a hairdryer. One could tell just how bored Abby was with a glance. She fidgeted in her seat while Mia put the finishing touches on her new ponytail. Once she was pronounced finished, Abby burst up from the padded stool and bulldozed out into the hallway, ready to disrupt whatever situation she was going to stumble into next. "Looks like you're up, princess," Mia said with a smile, then patted the seat in front of her. Kennedy always loved it when Mia played with his hair, and that included this little ritual he'd grown accustomed to in the short time he'd been living with the Adams. It was the primary reason he'd gotten so good about washing his hair regularly. This particular occasion, Kennedy noted how much easier it was now that all of the damaged split ends had been trimmed off during his recent visit to the salon. Once his hair was fully dry, Mia asked, "Do you want me to put it up for you, precious?" He just nodded his head silently in response. On this occasion, Mia had decided to put Dee Dee's hair up in nearly the same style as her new little sister, though a little shorter. Kennedy noted the momentary dissatisfaction on her face and for the briefest of moments felt the crushing weight of her disappointment tenfold, only for her face to brighten up in a eureka moment. She found a large navy bow in the mess of children's accessories that perfectly matched the shade of his dress, and clipped in at the base of his new curly ponytail. At first, Kennedy didn't know what to make of the elaborate coiffure, but when he saw the pride in Mia's expression, without realizing it, he started to feel some of that pride himself. He knew he shouldn't like the hairstyle, he should be wanting to rip the dress off him and throw the training bra in someone's face, but he had heard Miss Mia, she wanted another daughter and he wanted to stay. Later that day, he even got into an argument with Abby when she tried to take the bow out so she could use it herself. Instead of giving him like he thought he should, what boy wants a boy in his hair? That pride he felt earlier gripped him tighter, and he found himself fighting to keep his hair in place, the bow included. All throughout that week, Mia made a concerted effort to spend some extra time at home with the kids, at least while they were trying to figure out exactly how everything was going to play out. Not once did anyone ever demand that Kennedy put on a dress, but every day, like clockwork, he'd show up at Mia's door after his bath, and he'd bask in her presence while she tried a new style. If that feeling of security could have come without the girl outfit, he would have preferred it, but he didn't see any other option, and the thought of losing that feeling scared him more than the shame of being seen as a little girl. Every day, up until the doctor's appointment, how he was seen, and what he wore mattered less and less. Only one thing scared Kennedy, and that was losing this new family he'd been welcomed into. He couldn't imagine having to leave it behind. In that moment, he made his decision. Miss Mia would never have to worry about going to jail, because Dee Dee was here to stay. Maybe doing the brat thing again won't be so bad, Kennedy thought to himself. I mean, I could be a straight A student this time. She would like that. I'm gonna be the smartest kid in class. I'll eat well every night, not to mention the cable TV. So I'm a little girl now? So what? Sure, I wish I didn't have to wear these goofy get-ups. I definitely don't need a training bra, but in the grand scheme of things, it's totally worth it. I mean, Miss Mia looks so happy when I do, so how could I not? She deserves that kind of happiness. Even those brats have been growing on me. If this is it, then this is it. Honestly, totally worth it. As they walked into the department store, Mia knelt down next to Dee Dee and looked into her blue eyes, maintaining a serious expression. Listen, Dee Dee. This is the last time I'll beat this horse, but I need you to know, I will love you no matter what. This trip is for you. It's your reward for being such a good girl. Whatever I want?" Kennedy asked. The concept of someone caring this much about what he thought was still quite foreign to him in the best kind of way, and completely drowned out the distaste of being called a good girl. "Anything. Go nuts, honey," Mia replied, making an explosive type gesture with her hands before gently patting him on the head. "Okay," Kennedy said, before taking in the vast array of options this particular store afforded him. He imagined all the comfortable pants he could get, as well as some of the cool new punk rock gear. He was momentarily grateful for the level of gender neutrality that existed in his preferred aesthetic, only to sneak a glance back at Mia, and he thought to himself, she'd probably hate it. He took a moment to weigh his options, and decided to try and make both himself and the woman who saved him from a lifetime of destitute loneliness happy. First, in the junior section, he found a dress he didn't absolutely hate. Paired with a simple top, it wasn't inappropriate for the age he was now consigned to play the part of. Feeling it still needed a little more of his own personal touch, he zipped around the sales floor, filling his arms with dozens of accessories and shoes. Mia's arms also loaded up as she scurried behind him, barely able to keep up. Eventually, he and his army of selections were holed up in the dressing room, where he fought with the many unfamiliar zippers of his new garments. After struggling his way into what he knew Miss Mia would think is an adorable outfit, much like any other girl, he spent the next 15 minutes trying and retrying the different combinations of every little knick-knack and bauble he'd brought in the tiny little space with him. When he'd finally achieved an outfit that was to his liking, he steadied himself, and with a deep breath, he swung open the curtain between him and the waiting woman. When Mia saw Didi's transformation, it was like she was seeing the child for the first time. She was wearing a knee-length black skater dress, with a pink rose print over a matching pink t-shirt. The little number was simple, and it had a sort of a timeless quality to it. As if to say, I may be cute, but I'm not too cute. The outfit was accessorized with a pair of pink combat boots that contrasted well with the solid black of their laces. Tying it all together was a little stretch black choker that she remembered a lot of girls wearing in the 90s and early 2000s, and a studded leather cuff that a typical mother would never pick for her child, but Mia had to admit to herself that Didi really pulled it off. She was especially impressed that Didi was able to transform her braided pigtails into a cute wavy hairstyle that peeked out from beneath the cat-eared beanie she'd crowned herself with. "What do you think, Mommy?" Didi asked, her entire visage flushed crimson. He wanted to call her Mom. She was a good mom and he wanted her to be his. Kennedy had been and would be playing the role of Didi, and the childish mommy felt right even if it was embarrassing to say. It was the first time that she'd referred to Mia with the mother moniker and hearing Mommy, and it didn't go unnoticed. Mia tried and failed to fight back the tears as she pulled her daughter tightly into her bosom, and Didi couldn't either. The two were a mess of tears in the middle of the department store floor, and neither cared at all. They were both just so happy to have found each other. "I think you're gorgeous, baby," Mia said to her little girl. "I'm just so lucky that I get to be your mom." Seconds came together to form minutes as time passed, both publicly sobbing. Didi managed to get out, "I want to start the hormones like the doctor recommended. That way I can get a good start, like you said." "Of course, baby, whatever you need." Mia held her child by the head and examined every square inch of her beautiful face, before kissing her on the forehead so many times that the little girls let out a squeal. "Let's go up front and cut the tags off of that stuff, and you can wear it home. We'll come back this weekend, and you can pick out some more things. We'll have to bring Abby this time though, or she might very well explode. Are you ready for ice cream?" Clearly, Didi was, as she nodded along furiously in agreement. After ringing out their purchases, Mia drove the pair to a cute little ice cream shop where her other two daughters and her younger sister were waiting. "Mom, Didi," Abby squealed when they walked through the door. The young girl was struggling with practicing her patience, having to wait when there was so much delicious ice cream just within arm's reach, not counting the 7 tiny spoons of ice cream she got to sample the different flavors. "Does this mean we can get in line now?" she asked, dancing around like she had to pee. "Not quite yet, Abby Bug." Rosemary placed her hands on her youngest niece's shoulders and whispered into her ear, "Don't you want to give Dee Dee that present you picked out for her?" "Oh, right." Abigail jumping in place, the sugar from the ice cream samples already having an effect on the girl. "Mom, we got Dee Dee a present. Kenzie picked it out, but I picked out the color, which is the most important part, right, Aunt Rosie?" Her eyes darted back and forth eagerly between the two adults, continuously repeating, "It's the most important part." Picking up the gift, Mackenzie held it out to her newest sibling. "Here you go, sis. I saw this in the hobby shop window, and thought you might like it." She handed Kennedy a hastily wrapped package. Holding the badly wrapped gift in his hands, Kennedy felt tears coming to his eyes. Holding them tightly closed for a second, he tried to gain more control. One of those dark thoughts creeping into his mind, a little voice whispering that if he cried, someone would give him something to really cry about. With a rapid shake of his head, he opened his eyes. He couldn't help but tear up a little, especially after all the crying not even an hour earlier. Girls are allowed to cry. Dee Dee is allowed to cry. "Thanks, Kenzie," he said through a soft sob, then quickly added, "And thank you, Abby." Noticing the little terror already had her thoughts entirely on the ice cream as she looked through the glass to pick out the flavor she'd soon be enjoying. "What is it?" he added, looking at the package. "Open it, kiddo," Rosie said. Her encouragement was all he needed, and in just a few seconds a small pile or wrapping paper was on the floor in front of the kids, the mess be damned. "Oh, my God. I love it," his voice going up an octave as he squealed. Kennedy half expected the gift to be a baby doll or some kind of Barbie, but instead, he was surprised to find a model kit box reading, "Polar Lights Mr. Norm 1969 Dodge Charger funny car, this particular model, a nice shade of pink beneath the white text of the decals. The color is the same as your boots," Abby said, cheerfully, with a new sample spoon sticking out of her mouth, then pointed a thumb over the counter and asked, "Can we get ice cream now?" A tight grin came to Kennedy's face. He was going to make her wait for what she wanted as he wrapped his arms tightly around her and Kenzie's neck, and had no plans of letting go anytime soon. "You know, you two are pretty good sisters when you're not being brats," he joked before using his arms to hold them tighter to himself. The 3 Addams siblings shared a little laugh while Mackenzie and Kennedy wiped the streaks from their cheeks. Abby smiled and tried to wait as patiently as she could, but that only lasted as long as it could. "Ice cream? I know what flavor I want now," she asked the room one more time. "Yes, ice cream," Rosemary shouted back, and she began to herd the gaggle of children to the counter where the workers had been waiting patiently. Mia looked on lovingly, her heart full as she pictured a bright future for her 3 beautiful daughters. "Epilogue trick or treat," the 3 Addams sisters said in unison as a kindly old woman answered the door. "Holy cow! She's got full-sized Hershey's," Abby shouted after a quick inspection of the contents of the candy bowl in the old woman's hands. "Abby, calm down," Dee Dee chastised her little sibling, before cheerily smiling to her sugary benefactor, feeling just as excited for the full-size bar. "Thank you for the candy, ma'am. Aren't you girls just the most precious? Now everyone, tell me what your costumes are." "I'm a Jedi princess," Abby explained. For the 1000th time that evening, she pulled a serious face before swinging her little plastic lightsaber clumsily above her head and striking a pose. She was wearing a child's bell costume dress, a tiara, brown boots, and a brown robe. "Well, you're certainly a force to be reckoned with, little one," She then turned her attention to the other strawberry blonde-haired girl. "I'm a race car driving ballerina," she said shyly, her eyes still locked on the giant candy bar resting on the top of her little bucket. With a proud grin on her face, Mia elaborated. "She said she wanted to be a race car driver, but her older sister was telling me she also wanted to be a ballerina, so I figured, why not both? Actually, my two oldest have started taking dance lessons this year, and they're showing real promise." Dee Dee looked over at her mom, her smiling faltering for a second. That wasn't how she remembered that happening. They had been sitting in the living room watching the movie A Nightmare Before Christmas when their mom asked what they wanted to be for Halloween. Dee Dee gave a shrug. "Race car driver." Hitting pause on the remote, Mackenzie had a smirk on her face. "I thought you wanted to be a ballerina." Dee Dee remembered answering, "It is just too bad I can't be both." Sarcastically, and yet here she was now being both a ballerina and a race car driver. It wasn't ideal, but she loved it. Her mom had made it for her. Looking over at the trick-or-treaters at her door, the elderly woman gave them a warm smile. "I bet I can guess what you are," the lady said, turning her attention to the oldest. "I bet you're a mouse," she jested. "She's a cat," Abby explained, the joke going completely over her head. "Actually, it's a rarity that I can get Kenzie into a dress, but her little sisters ganged up on her this year. They said she couldn't be the only one not wearing a skirt." I'm filling up my phone with pictures, and milking this for all it's worth. She didn't mention the compromise that her eldest daughter was allowed to wear some kitten heels, just another sign her little girl was growing up. "Well, I think you look absolutely lovely." "Thank you," Mackenzie said through blushing cheeks. She playfully struck a little cat pose at her mother's behest, and then glared at her little sisters while the two snickered behind her back. "She looks so much like her aunt," Mia said proudly. "They're all so pretty," the woman said. "In just a few years you'll have to beat the boys back with a stick. They're so lucky. If anyone is lucky, it's me. Let's just say, there's no shortage of love in our home. Anyway, we have to be going. All of these houses aren't going to trick or treat themselves. What do we say, girls?" "Thank you," each of them said as they went off to the next house, each of them enjoying the evening and time together.